Hi, thanks for coming. We're excited to have Steve Thalheimer here, the superintendent of Elkhart Community Schools. We appreciate you all coming. We do want you to know that we have a dark room because we are recording. So, just so you know, everything you say is going to be recorded today. So, I'd just like to give you a biography of Steve Thalheimer. Assumed the role of the superintendent of Elkhart Community Schools in January of 2019. For 6 years prior to joining Elkhart, Thalheimer had served as superintendent for Fairfield Community Schools in Elkhart County after being their assistant superintendent for 5.5 years. He began his career as a middle and high school language arts and social studies teacher in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, where he taught summer school, dual credit courses, as well as advising student publications and directing a freshman academy. Thalheimer earned his bachelor's in history and English from Indiana University, Bloomington, master's in English from the University of Rochester, New York, and his EDS and PhD from Indiana State University. So we welcome you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for having me. So just one of the things that I kind of get out of the way in meeting with folks the first time is kind of the why Elkhart question. When I was at Fairfield Community Schools down in the southeast part of the county, had a fairly comfortable job there with a school district that was smaller, slightly growing enrollment, good cash balance, all of those things. And so I could have settled in there and just finished my career over the next several years being there. And I loved being at Fairfield. Nancy was part of the teaching staff there when I came on board, and it is a fantastic place. But as I looked at the challenges that Elkhart Community Schools was facing and they were looking for a new superintendent, I had several people come to me and have conversations about, please come to Elkhart. And at first I said, no, I like where I am, and no, thank you very much. But as those conversations went on, I began to realize that for somebody to come into Elkhart and be able to help take the next steps and to address the challenges that the district was facing, and knowing that this referendum question was there, the thought of somebody coming in from outside the region or outside the county who isn't familiar with the lay of the land and the partnerships and the things that are happening with Horizon Education Alliance or with the Ethos Center or with different organizations, that the district would be at a real disadvantage. And so as I thought about that and actually received a great deal of pressure from my fellow superintendents in the county, they all said, you know, a strong Elkhart County relies on a strong Elkhart, and a strong Elkhart relies on strong schools, and I believe that. And their whole point is that raising what's happening in Elkhart will raise everything in the county. And that held a lot of sway with me, and they actually, all the superintendents in the county wrote a letter of support for me as I applied for the job. And that doesn't happen just everywhere. So when people that I really respect and have grown in the profession with are saying that to you, you have to listen. And so I said, in good faith, I could not turn down the opportunity without entering the process and doing the interviews. And during the interviews, I shared with the board this same sentiment, that this is why I'm here, and that we need to ensure that we give the students in Elkhart Community Schools District from Elkhart and Bristol the best education we can. They deserve it. And so I want to share with you a little bit of context around some of our strategic plan and a little bit about the mergers of the high schools, because as I go around to talk, there's a lot of confusion about what those mergers mean, and can't you take some of the money that you're using for the merger stuff and give that to pay your teachers and not do the referendum. So I want to address some of that up front and give you a little window of that. Then I'd like to talk just very briefly about school funding and how that has impacted Elkhart Community Schools and why that has landed us in the position of where we're seeking the referendum, and then talk about the referendum question itself and the impact and what that means. So as I go along, if you have a question, please feel free to interrupt me at the time or hold it to the end, whichever you'd like to do, but I don't mind if questions come as we go along. As you ask, I may say that I'll answer that in a little bit, so I'll say that, but otherwise, please feel free to ask questions as I go along, okay? So, first thing, over the past 5 or 6 years, there has been a great deal of emphasis for elementary and high schools, particularly high schools, to look at workforce development. If you listen to the governor talk about any of his priorities, they're all around workforce development. And the move in education is to make sure that we have a skilled and viable workforce to be able to meet the needs across the state. And we all know that across the state there are positions that are unfilled, and particularly in this region there are positions that are unfilled because there is not a skilled workforce to be able to meet those needs. That conversation has been happening among the school districts in this county for the last 5 or 6 years. And a lot of that conversation has been, how can we work in partnerships? How can we work with businesses? How can we potentially do adult ed, stackable curriculum, career tech opportunities, apprenticeships? All of that has been mixed into the fold. So when the strategic plan was developed back in 2015-16 for Elkhart Community Schools, the goal was to say, how can we make sure that we're getting kids on their pathway so that they know where they're going to go and have a plan for after high school? We've got a lot of kids who are going off to college just by default because they don't know what else to do. They go for a year or two, and then they amass a bunch of debt, and they don't have a degree that helps them attain a job or a livable wage. And then they come back and they're trying to scrounge together and figure out what they want to do while they're making essentially a mortgage payment in student loan debt, which then involves home ownership, car ownership, starting a family, delays, all of those things. So that match to degree and college debt issue is also one that we're looking at. Countywide, 50, depending on the school district, 50 some to 60, low 60% of kids go off to college. Only about half of them get a degree in 4 years. So we're looking at about 30%, 35% of students in the county going off and receiving that degree. And as a county, we're at 24% in our post-high school degree attainment as a county. So we all take that as a serious charge, and then the state of Indiana in December 17 changed the ballgame on us. Graduation right now, up until this coming year's freshman class, requires that for a student to graduate from high school, they need to do two things. They need to accumulate 40 credit hours in core 40 courses as they go through high school, and they need to pass a graduation exam, which right now is a 10th grade test, testing proficiency in math and language arts. That's what you need to do to graduate. Beginning with this coming year's freshmen, that will change. There are now 3 requirements to graduate. There's still the course requirement that you complete the 40 hours of core courses. You also need to pass a test, but it's not the one state test. It can be from a list of tests, SAT, ACT, ASVAB, Armed Services Battery. Also, you can take career tech courses, a combination of those to get to 6 hours, or complete a career tech pathway. So any of those as a proficiency piece. Then the third bucket, or the third piece, is a workforce readiness piece, where you take part in a work-based learning experience, or an apprenticeship, or an internship, where you take part in classes that are project-based, where you have some sort of capstone or final projects, where you demonstrate the ability to do something on a scale. Or you have a part-time job, or you're actively involved in an extracurricular, not just a member of the team, but maybe helping the coach do something, or helping the drama sponsor pick the play and direct, but doing a major participatory role in an extracurricular activity. So now, instead of just 2 things to graduate, we now have 3, and a big piece of that is a workforce readiness piece where students are demonstrating that they have skills to be able to go out in the workforce. So that has all been there as part of the conversations. So in the strategic plan, looking that is the end goal for where students need to be as they graduate, the school board and the superintendent and the work that they did in 15-16 was to develop a strategic plan covering the years 2017 to 2022. And when I came in January, I made a visit to virtually every one of the buildings in my first 50 days. Polar vortex and some other things interfered with that, but I did get to almost all of the buildings in my first 50 days. And there was a meeting scheduled for the end of February for us to revisit that strategic plan and make sure that the things were in there still made sense. And so in talking to the leadership team and talking to the buildings and talking to principals and social workers and teachers, everybody around the district, we reaffirmed these 3 goals: that we're going to build vibrant relationships with parents and students in the community, that we make sure that we educate, retain, and attract students, and that we have a highly qualified teaching staff and staff to work with students in general. Those were the goals established in the initial strategic plan, and those are reaffirmed in what we're looking at. At the core of the strategic plan is kind of our mission statement, the Elkhart Promise. that we will know every student by name, challenges, that they're challenged and supported by highly effective staff, and we work with community and with parents to make sure that they're college, career, and life ready. The key part of this phrase to me that I honed in on when I interviewed with the district were the first words. Every student is known by name. For me, that is a shorthand to say that we know where kids are coming from, we know what their academic needs are, we know what maybe their academic and behavioral challenges are, and we as a school district have the tools to be able to meet those needs. I will honestly say to you, coming into the district, from my outside perspective, we have not done a good job of that. We have students in our classrooms with high needs, academic, social, behavior. There are kids coming into our classrooms from traumatized backgrounds, very difficult backgrounds. If you're familiar at all with the phrase adverse childhood experiences, there's been a great deal of research done on adverse childhood experiences, which means that children grow up in an environment where parents are incarcerated, someone's a drug abuser, there's abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, 10 things. And the research has shown that out of that list of 10 things, the more of those that you have, the more likely you are as an adult to develop negative health outcomes, cancer, COPD, other things, in addition to substance abuse yourself or anxiety or depression. But the other important thing is that students growing up in that environment as an infant and a toddler and a small child means that you are constantly living in an environment where there is fight or flight, where you are constantly under stress. And so the one speaker that speaks to this says, you know, that's the instinct that kicks in when you encounter a bear in the woods. You either fight the bear or you run from the bear. Imagine what happens when the bear comes home every night. You don't have anywhere to go. And the brain research tells us that those students are fundamentally getting rewired. Their brain chemistry, their neurotransmitters, everything within their brain is getting rewired and reprogrammed to adjust to the fact that you live in this stressful environment. As you can imagine, in Elkhart, with the challenges there, some families and situations that we all kind of know of, in a district that is 70% free or reduced lunch, there is a higher proportion of those students who are coming from those backgrounds and have had those experiences. But even because of, I would say, the Great Recession, middle-class families that have been put under stress are experiencing those adverse experiences as well. And so just proportionally and in general, since 2009, even earlier, there have been signs that this is a growing need, a growing crisis among our students. So in our district, there is a great need for there to be ways to address that. A baseline understanding of how that works for children and what do we do to intervene? How do we de-escalate? How do we manage transition so that students don't feel that their lives are out of control at school just like they are at home? That takes training, that takes work, that takes a staff with capacity, and it takes the ability to develop a staff that stays in one place and works with kids. And right now, we don't have that at Elkhart Community Schools. Typically, as we're looking at college and career readiness, we look at what happens within the elementary schools, and we do a lot of soft skills training and some career exploration things. In the middle school grades, we continue to talk about employability skills, and we have a 7th grade Career Quest opportunity that's coming up, where kids are basically going to have hands-on experiences with various industry partners and different sectors of the economy. 8th grade Manufacturing Day, if you've heard with that, all 8th graders in the county go to facilities and do kind of a scavenger hunt about the employment opportunities within those organizations. And our students do a Preparing for College and Careers course in 8th grade where they identify at the end of 8th grade, right now in my life, these are the things I'm good at, these are the things I like, and this is what I could see myself doing as I go through high school and for the rest of my life. That will change, we know, for students, but at least they're thinking about that and entering high school with that idea. And then typically in grades 9 through 12, counselors are scrambling with students to try to put together a course of study that's meaningful to the students, get them on a pathway that they'll be able to either go to college or maybe get an associate's degree. Perhaps it's the military, maybe it's some sort of apprenticeship or technical training beyond high school, and maybe apprenticeships or other learning opportunities out there. This is something that people have been working on all across the county, as I indicated earlier. But the nice thing is that with Elkhart and the plan within the strategic plan for the high school merger, this becomes a fundamentally different way to do that. So let me play this video clip for you of Carrie Anderson kind of explaining how that's different. Oops, it worked earlier. Of course it did.
I'm Carrie Anderson. I'm currently the principal of Elkhart Memorial High School, and I will be the executive principal of Elkhart High School when the two high schools merge. For the most part, that means that I will oversee all 9, 10, 11, 12th grade programs at the freshman division and then at the 10, 11, 12th grade campus. Elkhart Community Schools is committed to providing our students with a great education. And we're very committed to making sure that we provide our students, when they graduate high school, the opportunity to be successful in any college or career field that they choose. It's just really important for us to connect our kids to the real world, whether that's Elkhart or the global society, and we're very excited for the opportunities this is going to give our kids. We want to empower our kids, and that's the students before them, to be leaders not only in the Elkhart community, but around, literally around the world. The Elkhart High School model starts with our freshman division. All of our freshman students will be at a centralized location for their freshman year experience, and during that freshman year experience they will, through various methods, for the most part figure out which school of study that they want to belong to when they enter the 10, 11, 12 building. So once freshman students decide, research in what field, what career interest that they have, they'll actually decide, and then they will pick one of our 6 schools of study. So those 6 schools of study at Elkhart High School will be Arts and Communication, Business and International Relations, Health and Public Safety, School of Human Services, School of Natural Resources, and the School of Engineering, Technology, and Innovation. So at Elkhart High School in the 10, 11, 12 building, the students will enter one of the 6 schools. And within the 6 schools of study, we'll have various college and career pathways within the 6 schools. And then the kids will take rigorous classes. All students will have a class schedule that matches their career interests, along with, which we're really excited about, a team of administrators and teachers and support staff that are also around a career interest field, a school of study, to support the students as they challenge themselves to be college and career ready. The education of all of our students is extremely important. All means all in Elkhart Community Schools. Whether you are a student that is gifted or a student with special needs, we want to provide a rigorous coursework for you to prepare you through your 4 years in Elkhart High School, so you can explore throughout your time and then choose a field that you're really interested in. And so no matter which school of study that a student picks, whether you have special needs, whether you're high ability, whether you like music or sports or drama, or whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that we create an educational experience for that student that is based upon their interests and their needs.
So as you hear from Principal Anderson, the move towards the high school is, again, a fundamentally different way of doing school. So some people are concerned about the size of the new high school, with it being one of the largest in the state. But the notion is that within that large high school, there are schools within that school for schools of study, with a freshman division being located at Central, and then the 6 other schools being on the Memorial campus. So again, as Carrie said, these would be smaller learning communities, concentration on helping kids attain credits during their freshman year. Students who attain 10 credits their freshman year have a higher likelihood of graduating, so the effort will be to intensively work with students on interventions, tutoring, making sure that they're part of a community so that they do obtain those credits. Also looking at their interests, strengths, weaknesses, and identifying either a new or confirming that plan that they were thinking coming out of 8th grade. Then as they move on to the Memorial campus in grades 10 through 12, these schools of study become immersive so that students have the opportunity to identify this is a general field of interest, and now as I go through all of my coursework, the electives I take that might be directly connected to that. So for example, if I'm in the natural resources school and I'm taking a natural resources class or a landscaping class or an advanced biology class, in those classes, excuse me, I would get those experiences and things that I'm probably interested in. But also your English, math, social studies courses are going to take on the flavor of that school. So I was an English teacher. So if I'm teaching English 10 in the School of Natural Resources, perhaps I have students read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which is a treatise about pollution and the effects on the environment. Or we might look at studies on animal demographics, or we might look upon field plots and studies and land use. But there would be targeted approaches to the way I would teach literature, nonfiction reading and writing, so that it is more connected to the way that those students are interested. So it's not swimming around and maybe taking courses that you're not seeing a real connection to. Everything within those 6 schools of study would be able to do that, and with community partnerships, help ensure that we're giving kids exposure to those things that really are happening in the real world. So it's not made up or artificial, but it is trying to make those connections. And it does overlap academics and career tech and general studies, so that those programs are brushing elbows within those schools so that students get greater exposure. So a kid who's thinking, my only option right now is to go to college, because that's what everybody in my family did, or that's what people say I need to do, but having exposure to a career tech course that would be in that school of study, they might decide, well, gee, I can make a pretty decent living, and I really like this idea. What if I follow that career tech pathway and I get the certification? Or I just go get an associate's degree, and I'll be able to do that, thereby saving headache, student debt, and lost time trying to figure out what it is you want to do. So the schools of study become a very good way to do that. I'm going to play just a portion of this video for you. This is by Kelly Bearhide, who will be the principal of the Arts and Communication School. So this will give you a little bit of a flavor of what that looks like. If it will play.
Do you have a creative spirit, a curious mind? If the answer is yes, the Elkhart School of Arts and Communication shares your passion for the power of human expression through art, music, and media. Hello, my name is Kelly Bearhide, and I'm the principal of the Elkhart School of Arts and Communication. Welcome to our school. The School of Arts and Communication will offer a collaborative approach that will impart essential career skills while fostering creativity and critical thinking. Students will be empowered to pursue the kind of immersive learning, community engagement, and mentored internships that shapes bold, confident leaders. The Arts and Communication Design Team is pleased to be partnering with leaders in the arts profession. Our partners are Con Selmer, WSBT, Arts on Main, and Todd Allen Design. Our students will have the opportunity to work with the best professionals the arts industry has to offer. The School of Arts and Communication will be the academic home of career fields in commercial photography, interactive media, radio, TV, graphic design, art, music, journalism, publications, and the theater arts. Our school will also be the home of extracurricular activities such as the school musical, marching band, pep band, and competitive percussion and winter garden. Students in the Elkhart School of Arts and Communication will develop an understanding of creatively expressing and interpreting meaning through artistic design, media, and performance.
So that gives you a sense of what's happening within one of those schools, and each of those 6 schools will have, again, that immersive experience for students who are determined that they would like to perhaps pursue something in that area. The reason I share all that with you is to make sure that people understand that the referendum question that we're asking for now has nothing to do with buildings and has nothing to do with the merger in respect of the facilities that we're working on. The district is managing its debt service fund, which I'll talk about in a little bit to help clarify that for folks. But we're doing and phasing in $35 million worth of work through our debt service fund in order to manage the scale up of what's necessary to create that aspirational campus where kids can go and have those schools of study and have those experiences. We also have a partnership with a couple major donors. The Community Foundation has just granted us a $500,000 grant. Next Friday, we'll be hearing about a regional grant that we applied for through Lilly, which would be providing funding. All of that public-private partnership money going together to help us build a new building for the Education, Technology, and Innovation Center, where there will be robotics, mechatronics, welding, all of those career tech fields. The goal here being is that there is a place where this fundamentally new way of doing school can happen. So when people are saying, well, can't you just stop all that building and pay your teachers more? No. Debt service funds can only be used to acquire or do major renovations to land or property. If you do direct funds from a debt service issue over to people, then you end up in trouble like Muncie Community Schools did. So that's not the issue. The other piece is that we have to make sure that we have the people who will help fill that aspirational campus, providing the quality instruction to our students. And that's at the heart of what we're looking at. When I came in, I identified 6 priorities that I said the district needed to work on. And when I met with the board at the end of February and we looked at the strategic plan, I said, we've got this great thing going where we're doing these schools of study and we're going to do high school differently and help kids identify their 12-plus pathway. But there are some foundational things we need to take care of first. And so when people say to me, well, this money's going to pay people more, but are things going to change? And my commitment to the people in the school district and the county is yes. The building will be there and that will happen, but we've got some work to do to make sure that our teachers do that well, but that we also take care of everything leading up to that high school. Because we can have the best facilities and we can have the best concept for that school, but if students aren't ready for that, then it's for nothing. So these are the priorities that I identified. One is we need to take better care of our students and our employees in what we do. So training for our staff on how to manage those students coming into our classrooms with those traumatic and adverse experiences. To just say to teachers, you got these kids in your room, just deal with it, is not a way for success. That is why parents who have means and can make the choice to potentially go somewhere else because they have the ability to leave that. That is part of our student retention issue. So we need to make sure that all staff have that foundational understanding of what to do, that they have some tools in their toolbox for what to do, and in certain buildings or certain classrooms where there is a higher concentration of students having those experiences and needing more interventions, that we come up with a tier 2 intervention that is more consistent, building-wide, in order to step in and make sure that we can take care of the higher needs within some of our buildings. The second piece is that when I came into the district, we are a PLC district, meaning we engage in professional learning communities. This is a process where people get together and collaborate, and whatever you do is kind of driven by 4 questions. What is it that you want students to know? How do you know when they know it? What do you do when they don't know it? What do you do when they do? Pretty basic questions, and that should be driving all of our conversations around curriculum and the things that are happening. My effort coming in is for us to recommit to that and make sure that people understand that process and work through it, and that my leadership team and I work that same process as well. Third piece, curriculum. Over time, and I can't explain this was prior to my being there, the decision had been to kind of let curriculum become decentralized. It was kind of site-based, building-based. When you have high mobility among students going from school to school, or even within the county going from district to district, it's kind of important that you have a core body of curriculum that you're saying students are going to get, no matter which building you're in. And so one of the things that I want us to return to is a core body of non-negotiable standards that we say all students are going to receive regardless of which building they're in. How that's taught is up to the classroom teacher and their professional judgment. But we need to make sure that students are moving from grade level to grade level with a certain set of standards so there are not gaps in their learning or things that they haven't been taught. So that needs to be making sure that that's happening in number 3. We're working on that right now with language arts. We're going to do that next year with math. So over the next 18 months, we should be arriving at that point where there's that core body of standards K through 5. There's already work that's been taking place this year in math at the middle school, and for the merger, the high school courses are having conversations about what's the core content in every one of our courses, and if it was taught differently at Memorial than it was at Central, how do we come together and determine what that core body of standards is? Interventions, as I talked about before, number 4, we need to make sure that when students aren't behaving or aren't learning the material or have academic challenges or behavioral challenges, what are we doing with that so that we can make sure that that's working? And we need to strengthen our English learner program. Number 5 is increasing our communication to community, especially to our Hispanic population. We do not have great Spanish resources on our website. We are not great at this point about communicating those things out to a body of students that are nearly 40% of our students. And then finally, I need to pass the referendum in order to make this happen, complete the merger successfully, and then continue to look at our financial responsibility. So the referendum is to support excellence. When I've talked with people and as I went to take the job on, people said to me, how are you going to get Elkhart to excellence? How are you going to get it back to that? And I said, fundamentally, if you think about it, and if any of you have had psychology and know Maslow's hierarchy, usually a little triangle, at the bottom of that triangle are basic needs. Food, shelter, comfort, then kind of above that's belongingness, and then you get to the point where you finally reach your full potential. Right now, we need some work being done at the base of that. We need our employees to feel valued and safe. They need to have a livable income. They need to have reliable and affordable insurance. We need to have after-school programming that provide our students a place to be beyond the school day that's safe and allows them to get help with their homework. We need to take care of bottom things on that triangle before we can get to increased achievement and before we can get to excellence. Not that I'm taking my eye off those upper things. We need to get there. But coming in and identifying what needs to happen, it is that bottom portion that needs to do the work. So again, we can have that aspirational campus for excellence and for kids to get there, but we need to make sure that in the elementary grades and middle school grades, we have that staff that's in place and is dependable and has been there and gives consistent programming and curriculum. We need to make sure that those programming and priorities are met by a staff that's committed and stays with us. In a typical year, prior to this last year, the district would lose 65 to 70 teachers a year, just in its size. This past year, we've lost 130. And it's not all just about money. I'm standing here in front of you confessionally saying that it's not all about money. Part of it is, and for some people it is, but for other people it's a two-pronged thing. We need to take care of them from a resources standpoint, but we also need to take care of them as professionals. My commitment is to make sure that this happens. I need people's help to do the first. And it is only by us doing this together and both of these pieces being addressed can I make sure that we improve what's happening at Elkhart Community Schools. So it's related to school funding. How many of you are familiar with school funding and how it works? Have seen kind of a bucket thing like this before? Maybe a third of you, give or take. So I want to go through this quickly for those who aren't familiar and just to refamiliarize people. And there is a change that took place in January regarding school funding that I want to make sure that folks understand. So in this graphic, you see these 5 buckets. These are the sources of funding for school districts and traditionally have been so. So the debt service bucket here on the far right is the bucket that is basically the school district's mortgage. You acquire property, you acquire buildings, you do major renovations that you can't fund through your capital projects fund. You take out bond issues and you do that through debt service and you make monthly payments just like a family does on their mortgage. The other funds funded by property tax are the bus replacement, transportation, and capital projects. The bus replacement says that every 12 years you can replace some of your buses. The transportation fund is the day-to-day running of those buses, drivers, bus aids, fuel, tires, repairs, etc. Capital projects are where you take care of your maintenance, your facilities, and technology. These are all funded by property tax. The general fund used to be, but no longer is. But let me address something. People ask about the previous referendum. So in 2014, Elkhart Community Schools did a referendum for safety and security. The reason that that safety and security referendum was necessary was because this bucket, the transportation bucket, for bus drivers, transportation costs, the capital projects budget, which would have been used to renovate buildings, fix vestibules to have double entry doors, swipe cards, all of those things, These two buckets did not have enough funds in them because of property tax caps, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the referendum before was to address these two buckets because of the property tax issue. The referendum we're talking about now is relative to the general fund. The general fund is the fund that is funded by state taxes. And at Elkhart Community Schools, this bucket, 92% of it pays for people. Most school districts, it's well upward of 80 to 85%. That is your people fund. That's how you pay the people that work with your students.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Last referendum, you said covered all those items. This new referendum is supposed to overlap that one.
I'll explain that in a little bit. Yeah.
And so, I guess my question is, how are you going to use the funds this time when you couldn't use them last time?
When we couldn't use them. What do you mean by
Well, I
couldn't use them?
mean, that was specifically stated to building and other things.
Building and
And
transportation.
this one's going to overlap that one.
Right.
It's going to consume that one and proceed forward.
Hold on to that question and I'll answer that as I go forward. So the new funding system that went in place in January replaces the buckets with what we are kind of calling barrels now. So, and this is the way the legislature works. You kind of figure things out and then they change it on you because they want to keep it fresh, I guess. I don't know. So one of the arguments from legislators is that not enough money is being steered towards the classroom. That we're just bloated with people like myself who just sit around and eat bonbons and don't do anything for kids. So the education fund is the barrel where all of the things directly related to the instruction of kids is now located. The operations fund is for your facilities and what some people would call overhead. So if we take our buckets that we've had and we redistribute them, we would end up with most of, a vast majority of the general fund bucket going into the education fund because this is paying for teachers, paraprofessionals, nurses, media specialists, building principals. The other portion, about 12% of that bucket, is now going to go over into the operations fund to pay for custodians, maintenance staff, and administrators. The other buckets, as you can imagine, because those are mainly dealing with operations issues, those three buckets come over here. There are little slivers of them that can end up in the education bucket. For example, if you have to buy a bus and run a bus to deliver a special needs student to a particular program, that would fit over the education fund. Or technology is an excellent example of the split capital projects. iPads and computers for students go over here. For building secretaries or for me, come over here. So that's why there's some splitting. But as you can see, the education fund, predominantly driven by the general fund. Then the debt service fund that we talked about before, that still sits outside of both buckets so that they have a way to track your debt and understand your credit rating, and the state can get its Standards & Poor's rating based on the health of their school's debt services. So that general fund, again, you can see, split predominantly going into the education fund because those are people that are working with students directly. So back in 2008, property tax reform came into place, and this is where the state looked at all of those property taxes that were being collected, about $3 billion worth, and those were going to Indiana schools for their general fund. The state, in its wisdom, said, gosh, we do such a good job managing money. Why don't we take this over, not leave it up to property taxes in the local level? We'll assume the funding of our public schools general fund. So that way all the money will funnel through Indianapolis. We'll get to run it through this complex 7-page formula, and then we can give that money back out to the schools. And that's what happened. So up to 2008, notice this big portion of a school's general fund that was taken care of through property taxes, and there was this piece that was some state support. This is kind of important to understand because the state foundation aid that comes from the state at this point was mainly some supplemental aid that went to school districts that had high need, high poverty districts. It's a portion of the funding formula called the complexity index. So in the funding formula, the two big pieces are a complexity index and a foundational amount. The foundational amount is an amount per pupil that every school district gets regardless of the student per kid. around $5,700. The complexity index is a chunk of money that gets put into the formula and based on districts' free and reduced lunch counts, gets distributed out to school districts to help supplement and support districts who have that high need. So districts like Concord, Goshen, Elkhart have a high complexity index, and so proportionally they get more of that money than districts like Fairfield, Wauny, and Middlebury. What's happened in the years since is that in the new system, all of this is controlled by the state, and what our legislators are doing within the funding formula is that they're taking more and more out of this complexity piece and putting it on the foundation. So let's do a little comparison. Fairfield Schools, which has a 24% free reduced lunch rate, doesn't get a whole lot of money from the complexity. So when more is put on the foundation, what happens at Fairfield? Good times. And when I was there, we got to some good times. Enrollment was growing and the funding formula shifted. We were able over 2 years to give our teachers who had been there a while $3,000 on their base pay. Now let's go to Elkhart. You take money from this and you put some on the foundation, but what you're putting on the foundation does not offset what you're taking here. That means that the headline that was splashed across the paper a few days ago about a 2.7% increase in school funding, because it's disproportionate in how it's affecting Elkhart, Elkhart's seeing a 1% increase because they're robbing from here and putting it here, which is reverse Robin Hood. And you've got districts like Zionsville, Noblesville, donut schools around Indianapolis with high property values and less free reduced lunch count receiving proportionally more than 2.7%, while districts that are high poverty, high need, high ESL populations are receiving less than 2.7%. So on average, it is a 2.7% increase statewide, but it's working the opposite of what people would potentially expect. So the state assumes that funding, piggy bank of money that's there. If the revenues coming into the state decline, then obviously they have to cut what they're giving to us. When it was based on property values, it was a little bit more stable in terms of that stream of revenue for school districts. But if something happens to the general fund funding sources, income tax and sales tax, then we're in trouble. And that's what happened in 2010. We all know that as a result of the Great Recession, people were working less, income taxes down, people were spending less, sales taxes were down. So in 2010, school districts received a letter saying, you're getting 5% less revenue than you thought you were going to get because we don't have the revenue. So they cut school districts $300 million statewide. They didn't return that funding for another 5 years. So school districts have had to do, over that time period, with $1.8 billion less. Then we also know that those funds get diluted. So our legislators are running around saying, we're spending more now on K-12 education than we ever did. Yes, they are. They'll say it's 52, 53% of their budget. Yes, it is. But the problem is that it's getting spread out across more entities. So you've got virtual schools where you have kindergartners enrolled in a program where they are doing all of their learning online at home, not interacting with other kids. And then by the time those kids get to be seniors, or kids drop out of the regular public schools or other schools and go online because it's going to be great to do all your learning online, their graduation rates are in the teens. But yet the state keeps steering money toward them. Vouchers, largest voucher program in the state, was sold to the public as a way for kids who are in districts that have failing schools to escape those failing schools. There are kids now receiving vouchers who have never set foot in a public school. If you get a scholarship granting organization scholarship as a kindergartner, or you have a sibling that's in a private school, you're eligible for a voucher. And so public dollars are being steered towards private schools at a huge rate, costing Elkhart Community Schools about $1.9 million for the students, those vouchers being redirected. Charter, yes, sir.
Is that not because you don't have those students, so you don't need the money?
Well, we don't need the money. Part of it is that, but
So if you
prior
have
to,
less students, you don't need as much money to teach those students, correct?
but the issue is that those students are not all coming from a single classroom. So I can't just cut a teacher because I've lost 30 kids at 4th grade at one building. So that funding that we used to have to be able to support everything that's going on, and I'll show you a slide in here in a moment of just how impactful that is. But yes, those students aren't there, but they're not there in a uniform way that impact what I spend.
So that would mean you'd need to figure out how to change how you spend.
And we have. So in this instance, over this 10-year period, we've only received $100 more per student over that 10-year period from the state funding. You saw that all those years we went without. It wasn't until 2017, 2018, even to now, that districts are getting back to the level of funding they had in 2009. And over that same time period, inflation went up nearly 20%. So I can try to cut, but all of our expenses, utilities, health insurance, everything else has gone up at this amount when I'm being funded here.
Excuse me, too. So we're losing how much a year for students going out of district?
So this year it would have been about 1 million. And then the way the funding formula changed, overall, we had $2.4 million in cuts that we needed to make in December that we did.
So we've had about 2,000 kids leave the area and generating at about 6,000 per kid. So roughly that falls in your 1 million, 1,200,000. The people I deal with in real estate every day, they're not leaving because of they're leaving because of the merger. There's a lot of them. And I'm getting that every day. They're not happy with the merger. They haven't been. I went to those merger meetings, and they were so heavily stacked at each table. Give us your ideas. We'll listen to them. And then when they turned in the vote, oh yeah, everybody at our table's for this merger. That wasn't true. And those same people went from school to school to school, or meeting. And it just wasn't a true picture of what was happening. You want a true picture, you put it out there in the whole community and say, vote on it.
And I can only apologize that happened. I was not here, had nothing to do with that. Fundamentally, as we look at what's happening with the merger and the schools of study and the direction the state is going with the pathways, it makes sense, and I believe that it will be a good process. I can only apologize that that's how it was arrived at. Yes, ma'am.
Some of the same people were unhappy when the school split. So no matter what you do, you know, you're gonna get this.
I've heard.
Big opposition when the school split. People didn't like it, they wanted that. And the other comment that I would make is, for many, many years, public school districts got money for students that were in private schools. So they did get money for students, I think, that were private schools.
We didn't get money for kids we didn't have. You would get money for students who you might be providing special education services to in a private school, but you only received dollars for the kids you had. What's happening now is we're receiving fewer dollars per kid because the money's being diverted to students going someplace else. So to answer your question, I mean, I do have fewer kids, but at one point I was
like 2,000 fewer kids.
Right. I was receiving more money for the kids I did have because they weren't diverting dollars to the vouchers.
But you're looking at combining schools, right? But it sounds like you're keeping school buildings. So like I would assume that if you have 2,000 fewer kids, you'd be looking at shutting down schools. If
they were all within a couple buildings. But when you sprinkle those kids across 22 buildings, not to say that coming in I won't be looking at that, but until we know like enrollment stabilizes and we know where we are, I mean, those losses have happened over the last few years. Yeah.
That brings up another thing. Back 10, 12 years ago, somebody in here can tell me the Elkhart Community School Corporation bought 102 acres out of Dash Road and County Road 2 in case they ever had to build a new high school. Big waste of money, no sewer and water out there. Has not done a thing with that other than farming. And yeah, they want to start the FAA program out there. We've rented a building downtown Elkhart. $1,000 a day, I was told by one of your board members.
Yeah.
Initially. Conflict of interest, secretary, husband was involved in that building some way, shape, or form. Got it reduced to $500,000, you're trying to sublet. I don't know if any realtors in here have been made aware that we're able to sublease that building for you guys. It's not on LoopNet, it's not on CoStar. So if you're trying to sublease that and get that monkey off your back, none of us in the real estate industry are aware of
And
that.
then I'll have to ask about that and why it's not, because that's news to me.
And it's a conflict, and there's many conflicts of interest on your board when they go to vote on some of these projects. I mean, that one, a big hearing, when the secretary of the superintendent husband has some interest in that building or the leasing of it.
And again, that was before me. That was a recommendation and something I would have never done. But
A year ago, 2 years ago, they bought 15 acres next to the Career Center Annex from Al Kraft's estate for $250,000. Why are we buying more ground when we got 102 acres?
well, this is right there next to the current
I know.
technology and the collision repair center. So it makes sense for it to be right there next to the other one for the diesel mechanics building that's being built.
They bought a piece of ground on Kent Street from Al Kraft's estate years ago. Has several buildings, and as far as I know, they're being used for warehousing.
And we do have some needs for that.
I mean, it seems like we've got an awful lot of buildings that are underutilized.
Well, the lease downtown, I will fully admit, is a mistake, and Mr. Mao did the best he could to negotiate that down from an ongoing commitment and from 3 years at $750,000 down to $500,000. Also, getting us out of that lease would mean that we wouldn't be there for who knows how long, because once we would move there, either we'd have to build something else someplace else, or we would stay there.
So the plan is not to go into Pure Moran anymore. That was the initial.
Not yes or no. I mean, discussions on what to do with the middle school have been put on hold until we can better determine, again, where do 6th grades need to be, because the discussion as part of the strategic plan was to move 6th grades to the middle school and expand pre-K. Without any expanded pre-K funding coming from the state, we're not in a position to be able to do that. So that's one of the items of the strategic plan that's on hold and investigation over the coming year, was to really look at what's going on with those.
So when you say you make cuts, I know that, one of the big things that people talk about is there's 36 administrators.
32 was the original number.
Is it 32?
And it's down to 22.
Okay, so they have cut some, because I know.
Based on cuts that were done, down to 22.
Okay.
Let me address this
Okay.
issue before you go on. Let me
Okay.
go on. When I was at Fairfield, my superintendent's salary was a set amount, and I received my family insurance for $1. So I was receiving a $10,000 to $11,000 benefit outside of my salary. So to look at my compensation package, you would need to look at my salary and add $11,000 to it to say what I'm really earning. When you compare us to other districts, do we know that those other people making over $100,000 are paying for their insurance? I know in instances where surrounding districts, besides Fairfield, they are not. So to be fair and compare apples to apples, you really need to look in some districts at people who are making $90,000. And you do that, as I have at one neighboring district, and the proportion of people that they have making over $100,000 is substantially a higher proportion than ours. So people have to make sure they're comparing apples to apples on that, because currently my insurance premiums are coming out of my check every 2 weeks, just like every other employee.
See, that's where I have a little issue with that, because I pay for my own insurance. And with Obamacare and everything else, I get sick big time. And so when we're saying paying for the school teachers, I know they need benefits and all that.
Insurance premiums are really high at Elkhart schools. I mean, we aren't on their insurance because of them being very high.
And the issue is that at Elkhart schools, the contract language is a flat contribution towards the insurance, not a percentage. So if anything changes in the premiums, any increase to premiums are absorbed by the employee because it's not a proportional or percentage share by the district and the employee. So when there's no money to give increases, as negotiations are taking place with the Teachers Association, do you put anything on insurance premiums that only benefit the people who take the insurance, or do you take what little new money there might be and distribute that out to all people in the form of a stipend? And that's a situation we were in a while at Fairfield until the funding formula started shifting, but it's the situation that Elkhart has been in consistently, because they don't put any more on the amount towards the premium contributions to do that.
Do you think it would have been better off waiting a year for this referendum so that people would become more educated? I think we've had such a short period of time where this has become in the knowledge of everybody, that everybody's kind of fighting amongst each other over this because nobody really knows the big picture.
The issue will be is if we wait till November, I'll lose 200 plus teachers.
Is WVPE employees still paid by Elkhart Community Schools?
No, they're supposed to be self-sustaining. I mean, the pledge drives and things they do are to keep the station viable itself.
How soon's the next referendum?
How soon? If this one passes, 8 years when this one's up for renewal.
No, I'm not talking about this one.
8 years when this one's up for renewal.
So what
It's my
happens?
understanding you can come back year after year with referendums
Well,
for different categories.
we could come back with more referendum, but I'm standing in front of you saying that the next referendum would be this one up for renewal in 8 years.
So what happens to those teachers' pay if we pass this now in 8 years and they get a raise based off of this referendum? What happens in 8 years if that referendum doesn't get renewed?
So in 8 years, we would hope that maybe some things will fix in school funding with the legislators. Secondly, we would hope that our enrollment would stabilize and grow, and we wouldn't lose students so that that source of revenue would increase. Third, depending on where things are with the other levied funds, if assessed valuation is going up, then we wouldn't need as much in the safety and transportation referendum, so the amount that we would ask for in the referendum would go down. And we would have to evaluate at that point where we are. But our goal would be is that coming back and asking again, it would be less and hopefully substantially less.
But that's kind of what they thought when they split the schools, that we were going to grow and prosper and all that, and that never took place.
Right. And it gives 8 years for the kind of conversations that might need to happen regarding closing schools and those other things. I mean, if people are in a hubbub about merging schools, what in the world's going to happen if we go to close a building? So that's going to need some time to get people in the communities,
Doing that right now.
people comfortable about that. The other piece is that research out of Chicago public schools, where they've massively closed schools, is that it devastates a neighborhood when you close a school. So that's something that people are saying that in the process of doing the merger and everything else, there wasn't good communication and people weren't brought in on the discussions. My goal would be is for us to look at enrollment and see where it stabilizes, and if we look at closing a building, that those are community and conversations that we have to get people comfortable with the idea, so we don't just slam do it and then alienate more people.
Well, the rental properties in Elkhart County, basically are 50%. And the referendum goes through, there's a lot of rents going to go up and a lot of people are going to be displaced. And a post last night from Kathy Searcy said buildings and rentals are going to go up drastically.
And we understand. I mean, we understand what we're asking, but we have no other choice. I could cut 10 more administrators making $100,000 and have nobody to work on the priorities that I've listed.
Have those people actually been let go, or are they repositioned and?
A few people have underlying teacher contracts because they have an educator contract underneath that we have to honor, but we are putting them in places that are opening up due to other people leaving.
But the reality is, we used to be paying this in taxes. It was the tax caps that cut all the funding to the school systems. I mean, that's really where this all started. So when we talk about paying more, it's going back to what we had been paying before the tax caps. And when we talk about the people that you're losing, the people that you're losing are affluent students whose parents can have the ability to drive them to school and to go and pick them up. The ones that can't leave are the ones whose parents are working or don't have transportation and can't get to a surrounding school system.
So,
Brandy,
go-
I'm sorry. Brandy's been.
I'll wait. Looking at your chart, I think you're comparing two of the wrong things. You're comparing inflation to the school's expenses. It's assessed values that schools' expenses should be following. And when we look at
Not for the general fund. The four buckets of the property tax cap affected funds, yes, but the general fund is purely a function of the amount of money that the legislator puts into that formula and decides to send to us.
Okay.
Prior to 2008, yes, it would have been, but now it is a function of this.
So the bulk of the school's budget is no longer coming from property
Right.
taxes.
That general fund is entirely dominated by that funding formula. Yes.
Okay, I have some questions. Now, probably four, but first one is, what is proposed that, and I know it's different based on every teacher's level of experience and stuff, but like, is there a minimum that can be said a teacher will have an increase? And I know it's gonna include benefits and stuff like that. The whole question is are the property taxes going up more than
No.
their pay?
And everything that we've been looking at, they will receive more compensation than their property taxes would be going up. Because we would be looking at, for those who take the insurance, increasing the contribution there and, getting salaries comparable. I have a slide a little later, I'll show you. Penn's starting salary for a beginning teacher is $40,500. Ours is $36,500. So our goal would be to get teachers comparable as they come in. And we have veteran teachers who are saying to us, look, we're pretty good. We got in before things changed, and we've got some pretty good earning power. What can happen to help the younger teachers? And there's actually a provision in contract negotiations called closing the gap. And the idea is that you look at your highest paid teacher and your lowest paid teacher and you find your average, and you can pay people below the average proportionally more than the people above the average. So that could help close the span. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at doing. So depending on negotiations with the Teachers Association, if they're all saying, yeah, let's do that, then it's hard to say what's a per teacher going to get, because the younger teachers, newer teachers would get more, and those kind of things. But definitely everything we're looking at, and for hourly employees, I'll get to that in a second. We can talk about that when I get to that slide. Yes?
Are you going to evaluate teachers? Because we all know that there's teachers that could care less about the kids. They're just in there waiting for their pension. So with this new program you have, you're really looking at attracting good teachers to help the kids.
Yep.
And not just be there in the classroom.
Right.
But the reality is the pool of teachers is declining in rates that we have never understood.
25 to 35% fewer people entering colleges of education because of the rhetoric around teachers and the pay issues and all of that.
One of the biggest problems that they have, that getting good teachers, and I know of a kid that's in college and trying to be a teacher. There is a program, the state requires that if you want to go into education, you have to pass a 3-test program. What is it, compensation?
There's a pedagogy
Right.
test about teaching, and
Right.
then a content test or an elementary test. Yeah, that you have to
And
take.
if they miss even 1 point on one of the tests, they can't get in the School of Education. They may have scored way high on 2 of them, and maybe they're having trouble with 1 of them. And even if they miss 1 point, they can't get in. And kids are dropping out because not everybody can take tests like that. And especially in the math, they won't even let these kids bring a calculator in. They have to do everything by hand. Kids are being taught math in the lowest levels with calculators, yet they're having these college kids take this math test to be teachers and do it all by hand. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the college entrance, college ed entrance stuff, and then even the test to get certified have proven an obstacle because they're
Yeah, that's
much,
why we have a shortage.
that's part of the
Because kids
issue.
are dropping out of the program because of this.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so on a different note, when I'm looking at this, because I don't live in district, I went to school at Memorial, but I live in a neighboring district here. So when I'm looking at these different pods of schools within the school system, my thought is, wow, what's that gonna do with school of choice and people actually wanting to move in? I mean, what is your percentage hope on that? Because
Well, the
I
hope-
think it could be a good thing.
The hope would be is that if we are being more intentional and directive about how we're helping kids identify what they want to do. And another piece of this is that layered within Elkhart schools is our early college program, where students can take courses in classes that are taught by credentialed Ivy Tech faculty. Our teachers who have been credentialed by Ivy Tech, the students can earn a 30-hour certificate that they can take with them to any state school. That certificate basically gets their freshman year out of the way at any public institution they would go to in the state, and some private are accepting it. Our families have saved $1.5 million in tuition by the number of kids that have taken advantage of that program so far. So between early college, a deliberate program of getting kids on pathways, and a really solid career tech center through the Career Center, and the programs that are going to be plugged into these schools of study, that's a hallmark program and facility that is not found anywhere in the county or in the area. So it is our hope that us doing that effort will be able to retain students who stay with us through high school. And interestingly, proportionally, I mean, people may be saying they're leaving because of the merger, so maybe they're leaving while their kids are in elementary school, but we're proportionally losing more kids out of elementary school than we are from the high school. Once people get into the high school and get into that programming and are earning those credits, we tend to not lose them as much. So that's where, for me, the knowing every student by name and making sure that we build those relationships and take care of those kiddos when they're with us in elementary school, that's why that's such a high priority for me in the things that we're looking at.
Okay, so the one thing that scares me the most is what happens if this doesn't pass? What does it mean, in your opinion, as far as where the merger goes, how the merger, is it gonna be successful? What happens if it doesn't? That's my fear for our community, is if it doesn't pass, how can it, I feel like it's just gonna go down.
So we've broken ground and have commitments to facilities for the
Right.
diesel construction building. The ETI Center, we have commitments and are under the design build process there. So, and there's renovation happening at Memorial for the administrative pod and the College Career Center that's going to be in there. So a lot of these things are underway and happening in terms of the building.
Right.
So we will have the aspirational campus, but I won't have the people to make it successful. I mean, you all do the math. If typically we lose 60 to 70, this year we've lost 130. This summer could lose 200, 225.
So-
Because there's no hope for compensation. So then we look at larger class sizes, we look at having the ability to offer some programming, but I won't have, those credentialed Ivy Tech people, they're already being poached from us by neighboring districts because Gail Draper, our counseling coordinator, has done an outstanding job assembling teams of people to teach those classes. They're going to be plucked away by other districts because our people will see no benefit to their compensation and their insurance isn't getting any better. So that program could be decimated. We would potentially have larger class sizes. We will have to look at a crash course in closing buildings, and won't that be fun? And we will end up, and people can accuse me of overstating or threatening, and this is not my intention, but I realistically don't know how we don't enter a death spiral from which we don't recover.
That's fine,
We will be Gary.
right.
Need to educate the public.
What What scares me a little bit, after the last referendum, this money was to be put towards buildings and security upgrades and that. Central still has a horrible time with air conditioning and heating in the wintertime. And I even posted a picture to one of your board members and said, and the comment I got back was, oh, they're not too worried about their job, are they? I said, no, they're retiring this year. So if that money was earmarked to make building improvements in that, why can't we get the air conditioning and heat straightened out at Central?
Well, if people, because here's the flip side. If we don't spend it on transportation and security, then people accuse us of misusing the money. And that's an HVAC comfort issue, not safety and security or transportation. I would agree with you. It would be great to divert those funds to something like that.
Well, it has to do with security. I mean, in summertime, the windows are open, not the air conditioning, and
But you have to appreciate the position I'm in. I mean, we had bids come back more positively on some of our projects, and so there was a little bit of money that had been saved on some of the projects, and some buildings didn't have the electronic signs in front of them. So they used some of that money to do 4 signs at some of the schools. 0.8%, less than 1% of the $19 million for that, and we're getting pilloried in the public because we spent that money on 4 signs. Yes, ma'am.
I should know this, but how many teachers total are in the Elkhart community?
Around 800.
800. How many administrators?
Well, you'd have the 22 building principals. Most of those buildings have an assistant, and maybe a dean here or there. And then at my office, it's not all administrators. There are support staff. There are about 50 people at the Rice Education Center, and then around 60 principals, assistant principals, or deans. So 110.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your service and everything you've done and your heart that you put into this. And we absolutely appreciate your thrown into a no-win situation.
What's the real
And we
percent?
appreciate you that you look at what the education of our kids, because I know I don't know anything about the educational field, but from a real estate perspective, we represent homeowners, we sell our communities, we sell all our school systems here in Elkhart County. It's the Elkhart County Board of Realtors.
Yep.
What we hear from every buyer with a choice, making choices in their life, is don't put me in Elkhart schools. There's a lot of fear of the unknown. Some of it's miscommunication, some of it's rightly so, some of it's sports. Everybody has their own reasons, but
Right.
It's a consistent theme. So I can tell you from an analytics standpoint, identical houses in Northridge versus Elkhart is going to come to $10,000, $20,000 premium for Northridge.
Yep.
Now, with that in mind, our retail buyers, the ones with mortgages, a lot of them aren't making decisions based on purchase prices. They're making it based on what their monthly payments are. That's my payment. So when we consider taxes come into effect with that, and we're looking at we're competing with surrounding districts, and we know 0.58% of $100 for homeowners, not too bad. So on using the calculator you guys have online, $100,000 assessed value home, a vote yes on this referendum is going to come to about $207 a year. Cost of the price of pizza.
Let me talk you through. So let me kind of flip through just a few things that kind of address
Can I
some of
finish
this.
this one though?
Well, let me go to the slide because I want to show you the calculation we've been showing people.
Okay, this is
on
straight from your
$100,000
website.
on a $100,000
Okay.
home, because it's not that amount that you just said.
That's off the calculator from the state's website.
So that website is calculating it on the 58 cents.
No, that's including the homestead deduction.
No, what I'm saying is it's calculating it on the 58 cents where 13.14 cents is already being paid.
Okay.
That's not a total increase, that's what it,
I think we need to get
both
it out
of them
there.
together.
Yeah.
Somehow, $100,000 house would go up this much.
The increase is only
And let me show you that in just a second. So here's the one question regarding the property tax caps that was brought up back there before. It's kind of settled in for Elkhart that it's $3.5 to $4 million a year that we don't receive due to property tax caps. That's roofs, parking lots, carpet, technology, all of the things that go across those 4 buckets, but mainly our capital projects budget. where that's happening. This has nothing to do with what we pay people. This is the slide that I wanted to share regarding teacher salaries. So this is beginning teacher salaries in surrounding districts. And there's the 40 from Penn that they just put in place at the beginning of this school year. So those 6 districts around us are all making more. This is the slide that makes me sick. That when we look at that bottom row for these various classifications, this is what our folks are making as a paraprofessional, a cook, or an elementary building secretary.
And this is just wage, okay.
Just wage compared to other school districts' hourly rate starting.
Why, the secretaries are making more than the paraprofessionals?
I appreciate all that, but I'm gonna go back to the thing. So I'm gonna neglect that it doesn't include the 13 cents out of the 58. So on homes that don't have a homestead, which is our rental properties.
Right.
And our commercial properties, on a $100,000 assessed value home, it's $580 a year. Now, we have 70%.
Minus
What's
what's there right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
With the 70% of our students that are on free or assisted lunches, these families are hit hard enough that they can't afford to pay for their kids' lunch. And I appreciate that, or sympathize with that, we gotta protect that. More than likely, they're in the more than 50% of the homes inside city limits that are rental homes, right? Closer to 52 to 55%. They're going to not see the benefit of the homestead. They're going to be the ones that get hit with 2.5 times what homeowners get hit. They're getting the ones that are gonna see their rents go up $30, $40, $50 a month, the ones that can't afford lunches for their students. And they're gonna be the ones paying the price for all this. The ones with means, the voucher kids, the school of choice kids, the transfer students, we're gonna see them continue to leave. We're gonna see the property values coming down. So we're gonna see higher property taxes. That's gonna negatively impact values. We're gonna see people leaving for other schools. I think the vouchers have screwed us, but I mean, I think if you talk to any of the students the 2,000 students that are leaving, they see benefit from it and they're thankful for it. They have their reasons and they're getting choices. And I don't think that making that go away, which would help our schools, is necessarily good for everybody. I mean, it does make us compete and it's hard, but this referendum is on the population we have is detrimental. It's going to destroy our property values. It's going to destroy our hardest hit poverty-stricken residents and citizens. It's hard. It's even going to come through in the cost of their groceries because commercial properties are going up.
and we understand that. I mean, we understand that we're asking the community to make this choice. And if they look at us and say, we don't want this choice, then I will be faced and the board will be faced to make the cuts that I don't think will make that situation any better.
Right.
What happens if we don't?
No.
Right.
Like, what happens if we don't pass it to our area?
He mentioned Gary.
Saying it.
Nobody wants to buy houses in Gary.
No, exactly.
Well, I guess I have the question because I understand what you're saying, Corey, but if this doesn't pass,
Right.
then you're pretty much, those people, they can't afford the 50, but they're gonna be very upset because their kids are not gonna get education and people are not gonna wanna move here and wanna do to the Elkhart. So it's gonna, actually, when that happens, you're gonna see properties still go down.
Yeah.
Well, and we're going to attract people
So
that can
either way.
afford less, which are more likely to need more resources, have those 10
If it doesn't pass.
classifications of abuse, of
Which means they need more
mental
resources
issues,
and
which means they need
education.
more resources. We're gonna concentrate Elkhart.
I think it's kind of like, well, from what some are looking at, like it's no win situation, but then you have to really look at, is it gonna be worse if it doesn't pass? Which, you know, I mean, you can't please, you honestly can't please every single person, in no matter what you
You're
do.
only gonna please
But-
50% of the people, 50%.
Yeah, but you have to say, and look at it as a whole too, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, if this does, from what, I'm glad I came, because if it doesn't pass, to me, it's gonna be even worse.
I agree.
I mean, it's
I
gonna be,
agree.
and I think the public out there, they have no clue about, and I can honestly say I was the ignorance of, on myself before I came here. You know, so I don't know, are you guys gonna have like a public before this?
Tonight o'clock,
Tonight.
tonight
Okay.
at 6 o'clock at Memorial.
How come we aren't taking questions from the public like this?
We are written.
Well, it's gotta be written down.
I'm not going to be yelled at in this meeting by Peterman and his ilk.
Good call.
Sorry, but that's my bottom line.
Cherry pick the questions, I mean,
There will be 2 members of the Chamber of Commerce there to sort the questions and hand them to me.
okay. When you talk about losing teachers, I know a particular school, I know this firsthand, and it was from people that left there. They brought in a administrator to that school that had questionable background from another school. Didn't vet him. Sexual harassment and that. The employees were told, basically, be quiet about it. 15 teachers left because of that. Not just teachers, but staff, custodial help, everybody left. In a 2-year period. That person is still teaching, or administrator.
And I can't address personnel things, but prior to my time, and it would have been handled differently if I were there.
Well, and that's going forward. I mean, that needs to be addressed, because when you talk about teachers leaving and trying to plug them into the pay scale and that, it's not all about that.
And I said that earlier. I said it's 2-pronged. We need to take better care of them as professionals, and we need to pay them more what they're worth. And it has to be both.
And they gotta, I mean, when I hear this from teachers and friends and they're told to keep their mouth shut, that's not the way to handle people.
No.
When they gotta keep their mouth shut, then they're not getting out there what actually needs to be said.
Well,
I'd
the
just
thing
like to
is
make
that
a
people,
comment that, you know, losing teachers is really scary. I mean, I have a daughter in a school system, and I feel like the classrooms there's too many kids already. So how scary is that to have the classrooms even bigger? I mean, those kids that are advanced or need help, you know, it's.
my daughter,
getting kids read.
my granddaughter taught in Indianapolis, and one year she had 46 students. 46 students with no aid.
Anyway, I would like to hear more about it.
Yeah.
So just to dive into the referendum question and address some of that that's out there, this is the nice and easy little read that will appear on the ballot, because it has to take the form of a question. So it's for 8 years, shall the school do this, question mark. The referendum is essentially doing 2 things. It's repealing the existing rate. So it's basically saying we're going to take the current referendum that's there away, and we're going to put 58 cents on to accomplish these things. So it's not a full 58 cents, because part of it's already baked in that I'll talk about in a moment. So this is the list of things that we're going to do. Fund educationally related, academic and educational related programs, managing class size, safety initiatives, attracting and retraining teachers. Now this is kind of boilerplate language that happens in referendum, but basically it's going to have us do 5 things. One is continue the safety and transportation referendum from before. So while we're repealing technically the tax rate, it's basically rolled over into this. So that safety and transportation piece will be there. Will be to increase compensation for all employees, classifications other than administrators. So anyone from a building principal on down will be receiving increased compensation, either on their base pay for a teacher or their hourly rate for those employees like we saw before. Our goal would be to get those hourly employees closer to the average of the school districts around us, and teachers comparable to the starting salary of those around us.
Is that where we plug in what you talked about? I know I know a situation in the school system where in a particular program, there's 2 teachers there, one's been there a couple of years more, one makes 70-something thousand, the other one makes 43, due to the time in which they
Right, so if that one
within a
team,
contract.
yep. So if that person
Is
came,
70-something thousand going to get the same increase?
no, then that's where we're looking at where people are on the salary scale, and
Is
you
that
could.
determined yet, or is that?
There,
still up?
we're having conversations now with the Teachers Association, and we're using consultants from InFocus out of Notre Dame to help look at various compensation models and begin that informal discussions. State law only allows us to negotiate between September 15th and November 15th. So right now, we're informally negotiating in shorts and t-shirts. And September 15th, we'll put on our tuxedos and formally negotiate. So right now, the conversations are, do we steer more towards teachers lower on the scale? How do we put professional development and leadership and years of experience and all those things together to create that compensation model? And there are some drafts and versions of that that are being discussed with the Teachers Association currently.
Okay.
So funding, the other would be the insurance premium contributions, a certified social worker in every one of our buildings. Right now, some of our elementary schools share social workers, and only our social workers at the high school are certified. So we want to make sure that we have certified social workers in all of our elementary schools to meet the social and emotional needs. And then the after-school programming so kids have a safe place to be and somewhere to get help with their homework. So that's the 5 things that those categories capture, because this is the language of what's there, but that's the reality of what it'll be. Go ahead.
How do you counter those signs that are out there, 300?
Let me address that in a second. So as we're saying, this is 58 cents replacing the existing rate. So this is how it breaks down. Back one. Go back one. Go back one. There we go. So this is what's currently baked into property rates right now. This would be the increase to get us to the 58 cents. If you take this number and divide it by this number, you get a magical 341. So the 341 is the increase on the referendum school tax levy rate, which is a portion of your school taxes, which is a portion of your property taxes. So it is only this part of the rate that will increase 341%. But as we know, with people who have deductions or don't have deductions or whatever the case may be, you will not see maybe a comparable increase to somebody else depending on your situation. So it is not a 341% increase on your taxes. I did have some woman call my office and say, I pay $700 in property taxes. You're telling me it's going to $2,100? No, ma'am. Let me explain this to you. But it is
It's a marketing tactic.
It is a marketing deceptive tactic to get people scared, and it's very simple. This explanation is complicated. Everything I have shared with you today is complicated that can't be boiled down to a simple sign.
How do you get it out when you don't have a newspaper or anything else that will do a good job on it?
Market it as a latte or a Big Mac meal.
So this is that difference. And so then this is the example, to get back to your point, sir. This is the one that we've been doing with people in public, where we take the $100,000, take off the homestead, take off the 35%, do the supplemental, gets them to $32,750 as their net. And since it's on the 100, we divide by the 100, take it times the 4,485, because that's the new piece. Comes out to $146,888 a year, or about 12 and a quarter.
Increase from what it is now.
From what it is right now.
Currently is.
Because the $1,315 is already baked into what they're paying.
Yeah.
The referendum isn't very clear on that.
Thank you.
That would not include the renters though.
Right, that wouldn't include, I mean, because if you don't have these deductions, and so at our board meeting, I took a property tax bill and whited out the name and put it up and showed people which lines to use for your calculation. You know, your deductions come out of table 5 down at the bottom. And you want to use the net assessed value line when calculating.
So without a homestead and a mortgage exemption, more than 50% of our properties inside the city limits, if they were assessed at $100,000, would be paying $448.50 more.
Could
year.
be, yeah.
Okay, so they're gonna be, the non-homeowners are getting hit 3 times
Because
the
that, yeah,
rate
see,
of
that's here.
the homeowners for the increase.
As they did with the last referendum.
Okay.
Right, with any referendum.
And then within the district, 85,000 is the 25th percentile home value. 200,000 is the 75th percentile home value.
Granted that most of your funding doesn't come from assessed values anymore now, understanding that. But also looking at our assessed values are on a really high curve, and they still have a long ways to catch up before they hit current market values. Where are you guys taking that into consideration, especially with commercial properties, their assessed values? They redid the formula and they went through the roof.
I mean, basically, they looked at what would need to happen to do a meaningful raise in general to people, like a percentage raise, if it were a flat percentage, what amount is needed for that? What would be needed to increase insurance premium contributions and account for people potentially returning to our insurance plan once it becomes more affordable? After-school programming and projecting out the cost for the certified social workers. They looked at that and arrived at a total figure.
I'm not talking about calculations of what you need. I'm talking about calculations on what you would get just by the nature of assessed values being on the upward swing.
Well, then what will happen, and this was a complexity that was lost on people at the board meeting the other night. So if assessed values rise, this referendum rate would be on that amount, but people will see what they're contributing to the other buckets going down because our budgeted amount that we're needing gets distributed across higher assessed value, so that rate would go down. So as assessed values would go up, and the gentleman the other night just wasn't following me on this because he just kept thinking if assessed value goes up, everything's going to go up. Well, it won't go up on what you're paying in the school tax for the other four buckets, because that's distributed across greater assessed valuation.
Corey, can I ask you a quick question? Do you know what the average assessed value of the 55% rental properties are? Like, I doubt
It's
that
going to be
most
lower
are
than the
100,000.
homeowners.
They're gonna be lower than $100,000, the average assessed value. So to say that it's 400.
It'd be tricky. There's not an easy.
And I will just share with you, we had a woman come to our board meeting as a single mom in a home, and she referenced owning, so we thought she was a homeowner. We looked up her tax bill and calculated it ourselves, and she was going to be looking at $4 a month by what was there. When I have helped people, when I've walked them through the calculations, either the examples that I've done at the board meetings or individual people, I've walked them through it over the phone, and they've calculated it with me. It's the ones I've helped with and the ones I've seen on the overall property tax bill, it's like 22 to 26%.
What it'll do though, I mean, when we have higher taxes and we're looking at homeowners looking at a monthly payment going out, I would say if it's $5 a month, the value we lose on the homes is what's $5 of a mortgage payment over the course of 30 years. It's a $2,000 loan at current mortgage interest rates at 30-year payment. We just lost $2,000 in value. They'd have the same payment whether they paid $2,000 more or whether the taxes are higher. So we're stagnating our assessed values by increasing our things. We're also raising them on businesses. The homeowners, it's not just renters alone. We have a lot of homeowners that have their primary residence in Phoenix, in Arizona, in Florida. They have lake houses. It all depends where they file their homestead. The ones that don't have homesteads filed here are gonna get that near triple on that cost, plus the commercial properties and how they raise the cost of living there.
Can we hold questions for just a little bit so we can?
I basically just have this to share yet, just for comparison's sake. The other districts in the county, these are our current school tax rates. So you can see that Elkhart's towards the bottom third of the school districts in the county. Tax rates after referenda have gone into effect. Concord's didn't move because of their assessed valuation and how theirs was structured. Goshen is now over $2. I live on the south side of Goshen and just saw my escrow statement yesterday.
How'd that work out for you?
I was a little irritated, but then ultimately I'm like, it's for kids.
Would you like to move to Elkhart?
But Goshen just passed 2 referendums.
They passed referenda, so that's why this is up over this, because they did an operating and they did the one for the pool. Wani just did one for safety and security, so that's why theirs went up. So this now puts us third.
And Concord's gonna drop theirs. coming up.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
But
Well, I mean, it'll be up for.
and rumor is that Middlebury's going to do one in November.
So that is where we'll be right.
That's
After the
that's where
referendum?
we'll be after the referendum. Because it's $1.18 now, and you do the 44.85 cents. That takes us to that.
Fairfield still looks like a good deal down there, doesn't it?
Well, not it. So Elkhart loses 3.5 million to property tax caps. When I left Fairfield, we were losing 26,000.
It's because of farming communities. They're taxed at a different rate, and Fairfield and Wani have, and Middlebury to a degree, have such high farming properties that their taxes were, or the schools were not as affected as the rural communities.
So I would always just kind of, hang my head when I'm hearing Goshen, Concord, Elkhart losing millions to property tax caps.
But I can tell you from teaching at Fairfield, it's a very conservative school district. No money was wasted. There were no pools, like all.
And they don't have as many buildings.
Killed the discussion of doing a middle school. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, very extremely, compared to Goshen.
So when we did major building projects that were about $13 million across 4 of the schools, I mean, I had to keep it tight to try to not add more than a dime or 12 cents to the tax rate, or people would have.
Because the farming community, conservative community.
And one thing people forget is our Elkhart Career Center in Elkhart takes in mostly a lot of these schools.
16 different, even Edwardsburg, 16 different school districts send students to the Career Center.
But they're not paying.
Portion of their, I was
I think they're paying some, I don't know what they're paying.
$6,000.
So outside of that foundational amount, there are funding levels for different courses depending on if they're high need or high wage. So different CTE programs, you get so much per student. It might be just $100 per kid for like an introductory course. It might be $400 a kid based on that. So any of those students that come are in our count for those dollars.
You might get only let's say they do a half a day at Northridge, and you do a half a day at Career Center. Sorry.
Okay. So no, per credit hour. So or per credit. So like if they're coming to us for collision repair and they're with us 3 periods and say that's a $385 level funded, then we'd get over $1,000, 3 times the $385 for that student being with us for the afternoon. But does it meet our costs of the CTE programs? No.
Right. And they're keeping, the homeschool is
keeping the foundational amount, keeping the other amount.
So I heard last night, somebody said, well, hell, you threw a whole bunch of money into that
The Aquatic Center. There's the other big question besides the lease. The Aquatic Center.
Yes.
We paid $6 million for 20 years rent to be part of the Aquatic Center, state-of-the-art facility. We will also pay a few $100,000 a year as a membership and upkeep fee that will be proportional to the overall use of the facility. So other people, the Beacon Health people, Bethel College are all going to be using that facility as well. So we'll be paying a proportional share of that. The anticipated cost to us over the next 20 years of that is $14 million. If we were to repair the 2 pools at Memorial and Central, that's $8 million a pool, and our ongoing expenses for maintaining those pools would arrive at $21 million after 20 years. So we've saved $7 million by buying into and being part of the Aquatic Center over the next 20 years.
That needs to get out.
Here's the other thing. The Aquatic Center just got.
I'm not arguing about it.
No, they just got non-for-profit status, so they're paying no tax. No property tax.
Really?
Yeah. That just got approved by the state legislature.
But when you think about the fact that they will be drawing huge regional they are one of a handful of facilities like that in the country. So in terms of tourism and attraction, and hopefully it will be offsetting that.
I'd like that way done on my commercial properties too.
Yeah.
Just to touch on the Elkhart Career Center discussion earlier, are you saying that's a net negative in the school system?
We're spending general fund dollars to supplement the programming and stuff that happens in there. Any analysis that's ever
from other school districts.
And even, I mean, even from our own, in a sense, I mean, we don't get enough in vocational funding or Perkins dollars to be able to afford everything that's there.
Is that an issue?
Always has been. I mean, it's just the cost of offering that programming. So one of our thoughts is, how much can we partner with businesses? And the conversations are beginning to turn of like, if say Bentler or Thor or Lippert or somebody is doing some training in logistics or safety, or can our students be part of that, or could their people come and train our kids? I mean, what could we do differently so that we're not trying to replicate in the schools stuff that's already happening in the businesses? Because then we don't have that capital outlay and we don't have to buy the equipment and all those things to replicate some of that, or to try to keep up with industry. Can we do that more in partnership? I mean, we had people from the governor's office and workforce development come from Indy and have a conversation with us in Goshen a couple years ago. And I just kept saying, why if we're trying to train incumbent workers and they need some training and our kids are needing that same level of training, can we not cross-pollinate and do some of this together? And they're looking at me like, well, you don't do that already? And we're like, well, no, because 16-year-olds can't be in a plant, and you can't have people in your buildings who don't have background checks. I mean, I started listing all the things that get in the way of that, and they're like, oh. And so we're starting to have those conversations, and we're part of a consortium of schools that are being granted some flexibility to look at those kind of things. And so that's part of what we're looking at.
I got two questions that sort of and don't sort of relate to this, but the football, once they're combined, we are transporting kids down to Rice Field when we've got the high school out here, beautiful field. Why aren't we using that as their home field?
Well, you would be able to use one for junior varsity and one for varsity practices. And the Rice Field was just done in artificial turf from donations from the community. So
one donation.
The other piece of that is when people are talking about, costs and things, you're going to move from having two teams at each school, a team at each school, to where you're going to have one team. Now, right now, we aren't fielding some freshman or JV teams because we don't have enough kids. So we're not going to cut coaching staff in half, but projections are that it'll be like 60%. So our coaches, number of coaches we need and teams we'll have, will be cut to about 60% because we'll be able to field some teams we haven't been fielding before. There'll be the initial purchase of new uniforms, but then once that initial purchase is done and you're on a rolling cycle of replacement, that's going to cut your uniform replacement costs down. The athletic directors have projected all that out and see conservatively over $300,000 in savings.
The other question was, it brought to my attention that our IT guru has been put on retainer from our previous superintendent down in Terre Haute. Does he have enough time away from our job?
That I am not aware of and don't know.
I heard it was a $30,000 retainer.
I guess I'll have to ask, but I have not any concerns about the job Jason's doing up to this point, so I'll have to go ask.
I'll make it really quick. Thank you for, again, walking into some things that you walked into. Would like to know, are you getting good cooperation? I know Workforce Development, the Economic Development Council, this group, and I can't remember what it is, the Elkhart Foundation, Ashley.
Education Foundation.
Are you getting good cooperation with this whole vision from all those, Horizon, from everybody, that's trying to do the same thing, hoping everyone's pulling more together than, one party's doing this, another group's doing this, because
Right.
it sounds like you're at a crisis point where everybody should be like melting and pouring all the resources.
The thing about me setting forward that list of priorities is to avoid and escape some of the shotgun approach that's been happening. Because right now, just people are kind of plugging the dike and all that. So my goal is that for any grant that we would write to the Community Foundation or that we would do to the Education Foundation is connected to one of those priorities. All of our professional development will be connected to one of those priorities. Our work in apprenticeships and professional development and things that we're doing with business partners are around those priorities in the high school merger. So my goal has been to bring focus to that, so that all of those conversations are around a nexus of things. And it's going to be trauma-informed training for our teachers to know what to do with those kids in their classroom. It's going to be sheltered immersion language protocol training so that we know what to do with English learners in our classrooms and how to intervene. I mean, those are the kind of priorities that we're bringing. And then we're using our federal grant dollars from Title I, Title III to support that, trying to coordinate all that effort so that it's using resources wisely. And when we go ask the community, business partners, anybody for something, they know what it's going for. And it's the same with my goal here with the referendum, is that people, I'm basically saying to people, I need the referendum to get those priorities done and to start taking better care of our students and our teachers and turn the school system around. If I don't get it, I don't know how I do that. If I do get it, and in 8 years, the letter grades at our schools aren't better and people aren't leaving, then my butt should be fired and people vote down the referendum and I failed.
Quick question, and this is more philosophy. Looking at the byproduct of what all this is doing and how it's doing it, concentrating poverty, we're concentrating students that need more, whether it's ESL, the stuff. From an educational standpoint, is it better to have a classroom of students with similar needs, or is it better to have a diverse background where the students with more resources and better abilities are bringing up the ones that need more assistance?
Ideally, because we will live in a democratic society in which people will be mixed, it is preferable in many instances to have students in a classroom that is mixed together, where we're showing respect and dignity and building relationships with all kids. Then if they need additional assistance, we bring that support pushed into the classroom, or they can be pulled out for some of that additional assistance. But the more you start pulling kids out for things, the more they begin to feel expendable.
Yeah.
And the more they begin to feel like, I don't belong.
Yeah.
But
And
it
I-
also takes, from a statistical standpoint, it takes greater resources to do that, whether it's busing students, more support staff, because you're spreading them thinner.
But it also, I mean, and this is the point I'm making, there are some foundational core things that we need to do with everybody to ensure that there's less of an instinct of thinking that kid's a problem and I need to get them out. If we equip people well, then they can handle some things in their classroom now that they haven't been equipped to handle. So it's striking that balance and getting people to have that shift in philosophy to where the solution isn't always to remove them or put them someplace else. As Carrie said, and all means all. So as a public school, we're responsible. There was a businessman who stood in front of a group of teachers one time and said, you need to run your school like a business. You know, I get the best materials and I get the best blueberries and I bake these muffins and all of that, and you need to do the same thing. And one of the teachers stands up and says, we take all the blueberries. So that's the issue. I can't control the inputs. I can only control what happens when they're there and try to control outputs. And if the products coming in, and I don't say this lightly, if the products coming in are damaged, we have a lot more work to do.
You do.
And we have to do a better job of making sure our people know what to do to mitigate some of that and move kids forward.
It's hard to balance that when talking with like the principal of Mary Beck, and she says, our kids come in not knowing basic interactions, respect for adults, manners, and that, and Eastwood Elementary, the kindergarten teachers are like, our kids are coming in with full support of the parents and they know how to read and write.
Yep.
And having a kid who knows how to read and write going into kindergarten, you don't really want them in the classroom with the kid that doesn't know how to respect authority and has to learn basic hygiene.
And yet that's the world they're gonna live in.
Yeah.
That is a world we
Well,
live
I was
in.
gonna say, yeah, I guess, I understand what you're saying too, but I look at it on the other part too. For the students that don't have it at home, the education, they still deserve the same exact education.
They do.
Yeah, but then that's the schools needs I think for, what my understanding is, you're gonna teach or have them more educated, the teachers and stuff, to bring them up to that level.
You can't
Because
put-
they deserve it. I mean, but it's true life too. We deal with that. Adults deal with that.
Yeah.
And if you start segregating kids, you're not preparing them for the real world anyways.
You can't put kids in a bubble, because sooner or
No.
later, they gotta go out into the
That's the
world.
good thing
Yeah.
about Elkhart Central, the kids come out with diversity they know how to.
Yep, they
Yeah.
don't wanna handle it.
Well,
We've been here for quite a while right now, and I thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
your time.
You're welcome.
Spending your time with us. I think we all care about the kids, we care about the community, and this was very informative. So, and you were very generous with your time.
Well,
So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.